A lot of development organizations these days are really challenged by getting features out on time, on a given schedule, and at the same time keeping the quality up. And one of the key challenges is very often that when the QA process is separated from a development process, QA becomes an afterthought. Then at the end of, before the release is due, everybody's trying to get everything in at the same time. I'm a big believer, and a lot of people are, and that's one of the mantras actually of Agile. You should really test your code as you develop that, meaning interleaving development very tightly with testing. At Coverity we have a 6 months release cycle, so it means every 6 months we are cranking out a major release. And for the 6 months we do most of the time development. At the end we have a 6 weeks hardening cycle during which we do QA in the traditional phases of feature freeze, integration freeze, and release freeze. We use some aspects of waterfall in terms of the planning because we have a fixed cycle. We do planning before we enter the release cycle. And we also use Agile principles, like we have scrums, we have a 2-week sprint cycle, we have an interleaving of different teams in the scrum teams so that we actually get a lot of communication between the teams going. 2 years ago, we had a traditional QA-based development process where we had a QA team that was in Eastern Europe, was outsourced, and the QA process started 6 weeks before the release was due in the traditional 3 phases: feature freeze, integration freeze, and release freeze. Because the QA was kind of an afterthought of development, when we entered the release hardening cycle, we didn't really know where we were in terms of quality and in terms of the number of bugs we find and the severity of the bugs. So as a result, we felt very anxious every time we entered in a release cycle. Are we going to land the release in the quality that we expected for our product? And we had the mantra of test automation, and I talked about test automation and test automation and test automation and test automation to the team. I'm sure they cannot hear me anymore about that, but it was one of the critical elements which I very strongly believe in, to get essentially code development and testing interleaved to make the entire process more predictable, as well as getting the quality of the product up. The first phase of our test automation effort was focused on just getting the test automated. The next phase was really focused on interleaving the test creation with the actual code development. And what we realized 2 years ago, that there's actually not a good process by which you can measure what we call adequacy of tests, meaning have I have written enough tests that serves as some kind of sign-off criteria saying that I can move on from that feature development to the next feature development. Automating tests has 2 major advantages. Number one is a test, when it's written, for example, in Java or in any other language, actually specifies the behavior that is expected from a particular component or particular function, particular method, or particular part of the product. And by executing the test, one essentially compares the specification encoded in the test with the behavior of actual code. And if there's a discrepancy, that means either the code is wrong or the test is wrong. By having 2 independent views, it's much more likely that you get it right. The second advantage of automatic testing is once I'm done with a particular feature, and I'm done with the feature when essentially all the tests are passing and I have a complete set of tests, is that now these tests become what we call the regression tests. So when I move on to another feature, these tests are now always being executed every night or every time you do a build process. And when I accidentally change some behavior of the feature that I developed before by some other feature that I'm developing right now, the test would immediately fail from before. And that would tell me I essentially did something wrong. I did some unintentional change that I couldn't foresee. So the tests essentially become guardrails in your development. So you feel much safer when you develop on a particular feature that all the stuff that I've done in the past is safe. Because if I do something wrong, a test will immediately trigger that. One of the interesting aspects of Test Advisor is that it really helps you in an Agile or Agile-like development process. One of the key aspects, or one of the key ideas of Agile is not to rename everything, many people have done for 30 years into scrums and sprints or whatever. One of the key ideas is you test your code as you develop that. However, in the absence of a clear criteria by which you can say adequately tested, the acceptance at the end of a sprint of a feature, developed feature, boils down to it feels good, right? I feel like I did some testing, I just move on. Test Advisor now gave us a mean by which we could essentially now qualify, is the code truly adequately tested? And if not, it shows up essentially as a defect or defect kind issue that needs to be taken care of by the developer before he or she can move on to the next feature. So the interesting side effect actually of moving the QA resources into development is that developers actually always felt responsible for the quality of the product. But the artificial separation between development and QA kind of made this a side effect, or made this something that as it appears not to be important. And that's why, you develop all the features, then you give it to someone else to test, and that someone else is responsible for finding your bugs. By moving these two organizations together, you really get to the heart of it by essentially, finding the bugs right at the time when you develop the features. To demonstrate the impact of the test automation, during the last 2 years, we added a lot of functionality to our product and added actually 2 new products. At the same time, we didn't increase the size of the end-to-end testing team. So if we had not bet on test automation, today we would not be able to close a release in the same time frame that we did it 2 years ago. As one of the results of our efforts in test automation, the number of founds that were actually found by customers, or customer found defects, reduced significantly over the last 2 years. After initial spike, after the first release, we actually reduced now the number of customer found defects by 30%. And we expect that this continues, that trend, as we increase the test automation forward going.